Viewers, good day. To the Lighthouse by Virginia Woolf. To the Lighthouse is divided in three sections: the window, time passes, and the lighthouse. Each section is fragmented into streams of consciousness, contributions from various narrators. The window opens just before the start of World War I. Mr. Ramsay and Mrs. Ramsay bring their 8 children to their summer home in the Hebrides, a group of islands west of Scotland. Across the bay from their house stands a large lighthouse. 6-year-old James Ramsay wants desperately to go to the lighthouse, and Mrs. Ramsay tells him that they will go the next day if the weather permits. James reacts gleefully, but Mr. Ramsay tells him coldly that the weather looks to be foul. James resents his father and believes that he enjoys being cruel to James and his siblings. The Ramsays host a number of guests, including the dour Charles Tansley, who admire Mr. Ramsay's work as a metaphysical philosopher. Also at the house is Lily Briscoe, a young painter who begins a portrait of Mrs. Ramsay. Mrs. Ramsay wants Lily to marry William Bankers, an old friend of Ramsay's, but Lily resolves to remain single. Mrs. Ramsay does manage to arrange another marriage, however, between Paul Riley and Minta Doyle, two of their acquaintances. During the course of the afternoon, Paul proposes to Minta. Lily begins her painting. Mrs. Ramsay soothes the resentful James, and Mr. Ramsay frets over his shortcoming as a philosopher. Periodically turning to Mrs. Ramsay for comfort that evening, the Ramsays host a seemingly ill-fated dinner party. Paul and Minta are late returning from their walk on the beach with two of the Ramsays' children. Lily bristles at outspoken comments made by Charles Tansley, who suggests that women can neither paint nor write. Mr. Ramsay reacts rudely when Augustus Carmichael, a poet, asks for a second plate of soup. As the night draws on, however, these missteps right themselves, and the guests come together to make a memorable evening. The joy, however, like the party itself, cannot last. And as Mrs. Ramsay leaves her guest in the dining room, she reflects that the event has already slipped into the past. Later, she joins her husband in the parlor. The couple sits quietly together until Mr. Ramsay's characteristic insecurities interrupt their peace. He wants his wife to tell him that she loves him. Mrs. Ramsay is not one to make such pronouncement, but she concedes to his point made earlier in the day that the weather will be too rough for a trip to the lighthouse the next day. Mr. Ramsay thus knows that Mrs. Ramsay loves him. Night falls, and one night quickly becomes another. Time passes more quickly as the novel enters the time passes. Segment breaks out across Europe. Mrs. Ramsay dies suddenly one night. Andrew Ramsay, her oldest son, is killed in battle, and his sister, Prue, dies from illness related to childbirth. The family no longer uh, vacations at its summer house, which falls into a state of disrepair. Weeds take over the garden and spider nest in the house. 10 years passes from the family returns. Mrs. Mackup, Mrs. Macnup, the housekeeper, employs a few other women to help set out the house in order. They rescue the house from the oblivion and decay, and everything is in order when Lily Briscoe returns. In the lighthouse section, time returned to the slow detail of shifting points of view. Similar in style to the window, Mr. Ramsay declared that he and James and Cam, one of his daughter, will journey to the lighthouse. On the morning of the voyage, delay throw him into a fit of temper. He appeals to Lily for sympathy. But unlike Mrs. Ramsay, she is unable to provide him what he needs. The Ramsay sets off, and Lily takes her place on the lawn, determined to complete a painting she started but abandoned on her last visit. James and Cam bristle at their father's blustery behavior and are embarrassed by constant self pity. Still, as the boat reaches its destination, the children feel a fondness for him. Even James, whose skill as sailor Mr. Ramsay praised, experiences a moment of connection with his father, though James so willfully resents him across the bay. Lily puts the fishing torch on her painting. She makes a definitive strokes on the canvas and puts her brush down, finally having achieved her vision. So this is the story of To the Lighthouse by Virginia Woolf, and To the Lighthouse, it is, we can say, let me tell you about this. By genre, it's a novel type of work written by. And genre of this novel is stream of consciousness, written in English, time and place, written 1926 London, date of first publication 1927, and the narrator is anonymous. Point of view, the narrator speak in third person and describe the character and action subjectively, giving us insight into the character's feeling. So poetic, the tone of this novel is rhythmic, imaginative, and it is written in past tense. And setting place of this novel, the Isle of Skye in the Hebrides, a group of island west of Scotland. Protagonist of this novel, although Mrs. Ramsay is the central focus of the beginning of To the Lighthouse, the novel traces the development of Lily Briscoe to the end, making it more accurate to describe Lily as the protagonist. Major conflict in this novel, the common struggle that each of character faces is to bring meaning and order to the chaos of life. Rising action, James' desire to journey to the lighthouse. Mr. Ramsay need to ask Mrs. Ramsay for sympathy. Charles Tansley insistence that women cannot paint or write. Climax of this novel, Mrs. Ramsay's dinner party. Falling action, Mr. Ramsay's trip to Lighthouse with Cam and James. Lily Briscoe completion of her painting. The theme of this novel is the transience of life and work, art as a means of preservation, the subjective nature of reality, the restorative effects of beauty. Motive, the different behavior of man and woman. Symbols, the lighthouse, lily painting, the Ramsay's house, the sea, the boar's skull, the fruit basket. These are the types of the novel which I described above for you. I hope you will enjoy this, To the Lighthouse by Virginia.